Hello everyone, and welcome to this exciting session where we've got a great panel to talk about advancing your career in a remote working environment. I'm joined by three great speakers, as I say. We have Alan, we have Roshun, and we have Zonika. So I'm going to ask them each in turn to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about their background and why it is so important to develop your career within this current environment. So over to you, Alan.
Thank you so much, Caroline. I'm Alan Geller. I'm Managing Director of Rains International, a global search firm. I lead the financial officer's practice. Obviously, that includes the Treasury function. I'm also a member of the board of directors of the National Association of Corporate Treasurers, and we are very excited about our affiliation with the ACT. One of the things that I have noticed due to the pandemic is my schedule has to be both flexible and fixed. And it's flexible because it's constantly changing, but it's fixed because we're having all these Zoom calls and meetings that are scheduled. So a meeting scheduled for an hour, scheduled for 45 minutes. There's very little time to be personal. There's no what I'll call water cooler talk anymore, or bouncing ideas along those lines. But what has happened is because of what's going on, we need to be able to adapt. And I think that's a key phraseology. As one of your famous prime ministers, Sir Winston Churchill, said, if you don't grab change by the hand, it will grab you by the throat. And the issue is, if you do not adapt, you're going to wind up being extinct. So we need to be flexible, we need to be able to adapt, and we need to be able to change as the pandemic continues to morph. So the hallmark for me is to be able to say, I'm here and I'm going to do whatever I have to do to get done.
Absolutely, and that agility is the name of the game, isn't it? Well, thanks very much, Alan. We'll
100%.
move now to Roshun to introduce yourself.
Hello, hi, I'm Roshun Tulkens. I'm the Group Treasurer of Mantrac Group, based in Dubai. I've been in the role for just over 2 years now. Previously, I was at Reckitt Benckiser, also based in Dubai, and I've been in the region now for 6 years. Prior to that, I was working in the UK, both at Wrexham and Burberry. So I've been in Treasury now for just over 10 years. I think this topic is extremely relevant at the moment. I mean, advancing your career is important in any environment that you are. And just because we're in a pandemic doesn't mean that we stop learning, whether that's from a technical standpoint or from a soft skills standpoint. I think just to give some background around, the journey that, I've been on the last 8 months during the lockdown period, which started in February and March. Many of us thought this would last maybe 1, 2, 3 weeks. Obviously, from a Treasury standpoint, we planned for much longer as a department, just to ensure we had, relevant BCP continuation plans in place, and we were set up appropriately in order to handle this situation. But a lot of things have changed, and we have had to react and adapt our working ways in order to cope with this situation. Certainly my team, a few were already working, cross-border from me, so in other jurisdictions. So I think there has been a bit of a change around focusing more on their mental health, keeping safe, ensuring that they have their well-being and they're being looked after no matter where they are in the world. And my team here in Dubai, closer to home, we've had to really make some big adjustments, changing the ways of working. So moving to longer working hours, making ourselves more available, especially now that Treasury is at the forefront of the company. In any serious crisis, we need to make sure that aspects around liquidity, cash, risk, security are all handled appropriately. So we've had to really ensure that we are collaborating, communicating effectively, and ensuring that we tackle this head on.
Thanks very much, Roshun. And now we're doing a little bit of following the clock around the globe. We're going to move over to Singapore to Zonika, please.
Thanks, Caroline. I'm Zonika Ramsey from Rio Tinto, and I'm the head of commercial treasury. and responsibility for Rio Tinto's global cash management operations, our trade finance solutions, as well as oversight for Rio Tinto's trade working capital and its conversion into cash. And, continued development is a passion of mine. It's something I'm incredibly interested in and that I really encourage my team to participate in. And I've really been inspired by my team who throughout this period some of them have taken the advantage of the downtime, if we can call it that, to do formal certifications such as the ACT. Quite a few people have also invested significant hours in informal learning such as LinkedIn and going on to some of the YouTube learnings that you see and other courses that are available on the internet. And I think there is a lot of things people can do during this crisis, during this time, if we just approach learning a little bit differently.
Absolutely. And it's looking back just prior to the crisis, we did our annual research, Business of Treasury, where we interviewed 200 treasurers from around the world. And they were saying at that point in time that the real barriers to any career progression were around the kind of softer skills, communication, relationship building, and all those other things besides the kind of technical skills that you would expect of a treasurer. And they were very, very clear on that. And I wonder, just in this environment at the moment, do we sense that people are putting things a bit more on hold? You talked about the environment for each of you and how it is very different. And we just wonder whether people are not putting themselves at the forefront. They're so busy, they're so flat out, as you said, and setting aside time for themselves is really, really difficult. And also we hear on the recruitment front, it's quite difficult in terms of people are very risk averse. So there's not a huge amount of movement there. I just wondered if you could reflect on some of those points. And I'll start off with Roshun, please, this time.
Yes, I think from my perspective, certainly I wouldn't say development is on hold. I would say we're in a slightly different way of developing. And I think COVID in a way is actually helping us develop a bit faster because we are being challenged every single day. There's changing scenarios, extreme scenarios in some cases. And for me personally, it's kind of putting my ACT studies to effect. I wasn't actually working in Treasury in 2008 during the last crisis. So everything that I had, read around, making the department, effective and preparing for these situations has really come into play now. I also think, certainly for me, the development of the soft skills as well has also accelerated. I think because we aren't in the same room anymore, we're not looking at each other face to face, we are on a screen, we're not seeing each other's body language. So we're having to be a little more conscious around how we're coming across. Certainly when I'm talking to other departments, external, banks, being more persuasive, being more concise around what you are trying to achieve in meetings is all a way of developing. And I think an area where certainly I feel has been challenged is around the people management, because everyone has entered into these situations slightly differently. Some people love working from home. They find that they've got peace and quiet. They can get on with their day-to-day tasks easier, whereas others feel they need to be around people and continuously talking and chatting through. So how people have reacted to this environment as a manager, being able to motivate, being able to manage time efficiently and to get the best out of your team is also very important. So I would say that certainly the journey over the last 8 months for me has been hugely important. I think about it quite a lot in that space of time.
Really, really interesting. Thanks so much, Roshun. I will move back to Zonika now for her comments.
I certainly agree with Roshun that the development in some cases is actually even faster now than what we'd see in normal times, especially in the softer skills. And one of the challenges I faced as a leader is helping my team recognize and appreciate the areas they're developing in, because a lot of the development has been on the job. And when you're in the thick of things and life's going crazy and you've got back-to-back meetings the whole day, you don't always recognize what it is you're learning. And I think we as leaders have got a responsibility to our teams to make that space available for them to be able to recognize what it is they are learning and to point it out, to point out those softer skills of influencing and building strategy and problem solving and problem defining, which I've learned is a huge skill. You really need to have that when you can't sit in the same room together, right? So that's something that I have really worked hard to prioritize, is to help my team recognize what they are learning in this on-the-job training that they're getting throughout this crisis.
That's an absolutely a fascinating point there, Zonika, that we're often not aware that we are actually learning. And maybe people are sometimes worrying unnecessarily and feeling that that they're not learning, but it's actually, we've all been going through a huge, steep learning curve through this time. So I have a fantastic point there. Alan, over to you, please.
I think that technical development has taken a back seat to getting the job done. There's a lot less concern, I think, for the individual than there is for the project. And in many cases, as Roshun had suggested, that they've worked in groups. Treasury's always worked in groups, and it creates comfort and camaraderie, which is missing now. And I think it's incumbent upon the treasurer to help to create an environment with more feedback. I think it's important that people need to understand what is expected of them, as opposed to, not getting it or not understanding where they go. Do the project. But at the same point, we need to make sure that they're understanding, the staff is understanding what's expected of them. In a normal environment, non-COVID, you can walk into the staff room or walk into an office, and as we said previously, you can read the body language. Now it's become more difficult, and the treasurer needs to be more sensitive, have their antenna up more frequently to understand what's going on almost intuitively.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think this theme is coming through about having to be more explicit than ever. So again, a really, really good point there. The other thing that strikes me amongst all that's going on is sometimes people are thinking, well, it's going to be over, as you referenced earlier, it's going to be over in a few months. And we really are in for the medium to longer haul here. Well, one of the interesting things that we know research shows us is that learning builds resilience. So if people are learning, and we've talked about that we feel people really are learning through these times, then there's that great prospect of it building people's resilience. And a focus, if we can be more explicit, and going back to Zonika's point earlier, be more explicit and focus on what we are learning and understand that, and then that's kind of maybe acting as a little kind of antidote to the things around us that we're not so happy with, and can build more positivity, etc. And we have a feeling of taking control, which I think is important for people. So I'm just going to stick with you, Alan, and ask for your comments on those thoughts, please.
Well, I think that in many cases, we're missing a lot of the benefits of working remotely in this pandemic. I have noticed from clients that in a prior life would never have considered letting their staff work remotely. But now that we're 6 months into this, senior executives are recognizing the fact that they've hired mature, responsible adults who don't necessarily need to be coddled, that they can work on their own. As a child gets older, they get more responsibility. So now we have adults, and the treasurer needs to kind of let go of the reins a little bit and let people be. However, again, I'll go back to the idea that the treasurer needs to be proactive with the communications process. I think that's really critical, for the treasurer to initiate the conversations. In an office setting, the treasurer can see it happening, or someone's going to come in and say, hey, this is going on. Whereas it might not happen as frequently on a remote basis. So the treasurer has to be more sensitive to it and be more proactive with the communications. Initiate the conversations. Do not be reactive, be proactive.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Alan. Roshun.
Yeah, and I think Alan made some really good points there around this whole situation. There is a lot more focus now on ensuring that the time is spent actually ensuring that things are happening in the right ways. Because when you're not physically in the office looking at things happening around you, you almost need to force yourself to get into those situations. So there's always time spent with the team interacting and getting closer to what's going on. I think certainly some people did expect this to be a little bit of a shorter term change. And when we first went into lockdown, I mentioned before, some are thinking more a matter of weeks than months. And there was certainly a stigma attached to working from home and working remotely. The trust, I think, is certainly there from senior management to show that if you can run multi-billion-dollar companies from home, things haven't fallen apart. Things are actually probably, I would say, got more focused during this pandemic. I think it's certainly a good thing that's come out of the COVID situation. See a number of benefits as well. Certainly from a commuting perspective. I remember when I was back in the UK, my commute was an hour and a half each way. Certain people with those longer commutes now can actually spend a little bit more time actually having some work-life balance, or even doing additional work at home as well. So certainly having a little bit less time commuting is certainly a helpful attribute that's come out of this. Going back to your point as well, Caroline, on the resilience, I certainly think that departments and companies that have been prepared and also seen an advantage coming from the COVID situation certainly come out of this a lot better. So certainly treasurers that have had the setup, the aspects in place in order to tackle these situations hands-on have succeeded much better, which again, from a resilience perspective, it now gives the confidence to tackle more of these issues now hands-on. So I think again it comes back to the learning. The more challenging scenarios you're in, naturally the pressure gets eased the more you overcome with this. So I think hopefully now we're, even if it's going to go on for a little bit longer in terms of the lockdown situation, I think we're growing as people, as departments, to tackle this head on.
Well, thanks very much, Roshun. And we're doing this in such difficult times, really. As one person put it, we're not working from home. We're sat at home trying to work in a crisis. And I think it's going to be really interesting when we come out of this, however we come out in people say the next normal, I like to say the new normal, because I think it will be constantly changing as life does. But thinking, what would it actually be like? You mentioned stigma of working from home. This has gotten people away from the idea of working from home being stigmatic or whatever. But actually, when we are working from home but not having a crisis around us, it's going to actually be quite a different experience, I imagine, and a much more positive experience, as there are some negatives at the moment. But I'll stop there and move on to Zonika to hear what she has to say.
I certainly think stigma is changing. If I just look at what we're doing at Rio Tinto, prior to COVID, for people to work from home on an ongoing basis, you had to do a bunch of forms, your general manager had to approve it, etc., etc. Whereas now, the latest conversations we've been having as well, actually, you only need to get general manager approval if you're going to be working from home when we finally get back to the office, that is. You're only going to be working from home for more than 2 days a week. Very different mindset. To even be having this conversation is such a different place for us. And I think, coming back to resilience and what builds resilience and what helps people cope, certainly a growth mindset, I believe, is very important, and that's that mindset that I can grow, I can change, I can learn. And just because I don't know something today doesn't mean I won't know it tomorrow, right? And being okay with that. I think something that's for a lot of people is very difficult to do. And a lot of people think that for me to learn something, I've got to go get a formal qualification, right? I've got to go study up on this, I've got to go study up on that. And I think partly what helps us build that resilience uh, is to broaden our definition of learning and to broaden our definition of what development is. To really think bigger than just formal programs and courses on the internet, and to really embrace experiences as learning, right? And to expose ourselves to as many different experiences as we can, of which this COVID crisis and working from home is actually just one of those. You can kind of imagine in 20 years' time what the history books are going to say about that, and we will be able to tell the then teenagers, back in the day when COVID hit, we did this. And I think that's something, just reflecting on that can help us deal with the current situation a lot more easily, if I can put it like that.
Absolutely. I think you make some absolutely brilliant points there. A lot of food for thought there, Zonika. And that thing, reinventing the definition of learning. Love it. So thanks very much for that. And just moving forward, we have talked already about some of the positives of working in a virtual world as regards personal development, etc. And we've talked a little bit about the barriers, but I'd just like to turn to each of you and say, just to highlight a little bit more, go into a little bit more deeply, some of the barriers you feel that there could be at this time to developing ourselves and our careers, and then maybe some of the real benefits that you'd like to highlight. And we'll stick with Zonika to start us off on that one, please.
I really miss the water cooler conversations. I personally underestimated how instrumental water cooler conversations were in providing informal coaching, and from learning from my peers. It's just up and down the hierarchy across teams, at the water cooler, at the coffee fountain, whatever you want to call it. You have those very casual conversations and you just learn so much. And while, as I indicated, I've got an incredibly proactive team, we had a pre-existing culture of learning and development. We've had to take it a step further to compensate for that, for the loss of the water cooler conversations and the loss of the lunch and learn, when you all get together at lunchtime and just have a conversation about a topic. So we couldn't do that, right? So what we've done, and something I found really useful, is we've really focused in on the manager once removed conversations. And previously, to have a manager once removed conversation, we are a global organization, we'd wait for the manager to be in town, and then we'd organize a series of these meetings. Now, obviously, some of the managers haven't been in town for 8 or so months already, and so that just wasn't possible. What we've done is we've used the technology we're using now to have virtual conversations, and as a result, every single person in my team has had a career conversation in the past 6 or so months, which is just an experience they would not have been able to have before COVID, because we would have waited for the manager to be in town and they've only got limited time, etc., etc. So definitely, as much as I miss the water cooler conversation, my team has certainly appreciated the career conversations with their manager once removed.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and that is a real benefit of living in the virtual world. People's availability generally as well when they're not traveling here, there and everywhere, and of course it benefits the environment. The ACT and certainly we're trialling something at the moment which we are calling water cooler moments, and we're mixing people up in 3s and 4s and just shoving them in the diary for 10 minutes at random times, and then people just get on and chat with each other, because we found with our calls, when we got everyone on the call, people are a bit shy about speaking. We had our first one the other day, and I know in my little group we chatted really nicely, and it was fun. It's not the same. It is a bit, it is a bit kind of pre-planned and so on, so you don't get that spontaneity. But we'll let you know how it goes, Zonika. But meanwhile, I'll move over to Roshun for his thoughts on barriers and positives, please.
Yeah, sure. I think for me, the main barrier was, I think, giving feedback virtually, especially the difficult conversations. I feel that it's a bit less sincere doing it electronic, and it kind of goes back to what I was saying before about the the body language aspect. Things may be misinterpreted over video or Skype calls, things like that. And honestly, I don't think I really have a solution to that yet. I do feel that having these face-to-face discussions are much better, but I think we've kind of got to get on with it, really. I mean, this is kind of, as we said before, the new norm. So we're going to have to just overcome this, and again, it comes down to another form of development on the soft skills. One of the other aspects I can talk about is just before the lockdown, I'd actually hired a new member of my team. So 5 days before lockdown started, and trying to get a new person in the team up to speed with the new culture of an organisation virtually is quite challenging. They would not have met any of their colleagues, any of their team members. So this really kind of pushed the boundaries, I think, in terms of development. And 8 months on, there's no looking back. But at the time, it's really something that you really have to think about and come across and try and knock down these boundaries.
It's a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think these are all things that we have to overcome. But I think from a positive perspective, and linking into what Zonika was saying, I really miss these kind of water cooler chats as well, because in Treasury there's not a right or wrong answer for a lot of these things, and actually having the discussions around what you want to do, how you're going to overcome a certain situation, having these discussions is vital, and certainly cross departments as well. There's many projects where it's not just Treasury involved. There's other departments involved as well, and we need to get everyone's viewpoints and feedback. And I think one thing we did very well. So as the lockdown started, our CFO actually set daily calls in the diary with all the department heads, and I've never felt so connected, because in a sense we're actually not forced is the wrong word, but we had the opportunity to actually talk about what our departments were doing every single day with our peers to try and tackle these situations head on. And that was a really good time, actually, because you really did feel connected with the rest of the organisation, which was fantastic. And I think leading on from that, it is quite easy to silo yourself when you're working remotely. You could actually go days without not talking to anyone if you really wanted to. So I think it's important, having these regular team meetings, video conferences, one-on-one, even if there's not actually necessarily a topic, just having that time to talk, work or personal, making sure your team's okay, is a really key importance around this. And one thing that my company is actually going to do, regardless of whether we can start going back to the office, we are actually going to make a permanent change. So we are going to start working 2 days from home, 3 days in the office permanently. We've seen that it's worked well. We've seen there's positives, from working from home, and we want to keep that going. So certainly, it is definitely going to be the new norm for us going forward.
Oh, very, very interesting, Roshun. And just on reflecting on that, you talk about people being siloed and having to watch out for that. We do have to look out for people, particularly on the, their mental well-being, because people can sometimes not realise that they're a bit isolated, and they get more and more, and then they get into trouble in terms of their well-being before they know it. So it is something to really focus on. And you mentioned your new member of staff. Well, we've had a few new members of staff at the ACT during this period, and in particular my chief financial officer. And he came round last week for a socially distanced meeting in my garden. And he pointed out, and I'd actually forgotten this, which is my point really, the last time I'd seen him was in second interview. And it was really interesting because we're so connected through virtual. I hadn't really realised that I hadn't seen him since he started work physically, because he started just as we were going into lockdown. And it's fascinating when you think that this virtual world, you can work in that way. And he's doing a fabulous job, I have to say. So I hope he's watching this session, because he's doing a fantastic job. And it's all been, he's got to know the business, and he's got to know the people virtually. It is absolutely fascinating. And I'll now move on, though, to Alan for your barriers and positives.
Well, it's one word: communications. I think that communication goes both up and down, and we need to be do it more frequently. Your example with your CFO of socially distanced coffee in the garden is a perfect example. I'll use park bench, but it works and it happens occasionally. The interesting thing is during the last 6 months, we've probably onboarded 6 or 7 individuals. And one of the things that we have done, which we've found very successful, is that we've had half-hour introductory Zoom calls with all their peers and the people that they work for, so that it gets on your schedule. One of the coordinators puts it on the schedule, and we fortunately all the coordinators have access to everybody's schedule, so they can look at the new employee's schedule and one of the managing director's schedule and just lay it in there for a half hour. The interesting thing is, a lot of these conversations are very helpful in just terms of understanding who the individuals are and what they do. Some staff require more hand-holding than others. You have to pay attention to that. And again, it's a sensitivity that the senior officer must have that feel out. But one of the things that I'd like to see change, and Roshun kind of alluded to it, instead of having annual reviews, have them quarterly, because it gives the individual a much greater chance to adjust, as opposed to being 12 months into something and saying, hey, you should have done this or you should have done that. I want to have it done on a quarterly basis so that they can readjust their course if necessary, or be encouraged to continue along that path. Those feedback sessions are critical, and they don't necessarily have to be like that 12-page annual review written down. But I think that both the treasurer and their staff need to have that communications, and the treasurer needs to be open to hearing from their staff people what they think that needs to change. The ability to communicate up and down is absolutely critical and needs to be fostered. And if each one of us is only as strong as the members on our team, and we've all heard that for forever, but you have to help them help themselves. That's the the mentor issue, if you will, of the senior executive. If you're not helping your people get better, then you're getting worse.
Yeah, absolutely. And that feedback point's now come up a couple of times. Roshun was also talking about feedback and talking about that frequency, enforcing that point. We can't develop if we don't get feedback, any of us. Yeah, whether it's up, down, sideways, whatever. So it's so important for career development. Excellent points there, coming all together now. As we head a little bit towards the end of our session, we've just got some 9 or 10 minutes left to go. So we're going to focus in now on asking you really, what would be your top tips that you have learned, in effect, over the last 8 months? Particularly around career development of people, growth of your teams, but it could be anything you like, really. And what do you think will hold us in good stead going into an uncertain future? So if we stick with you, Alan, if you'd like to respond on that one, please.
Well, the one thing I can guarantee you is that there will be a future. We just don't know what it's going to be like. But that's not unusual. I mean, that's been, the history of man. So I'll go back to one of the things I said earlier, that we need to be flexible and be able to adapt. But I still think that, and just going back to my prior points, is that regular communications process needs to be more reinforced. And whether it's the water cooler, the coffee room, the lunchroom, walking down the hall and sticking your head in somebody's office saying, hey, can I have a couple seconds? Doesn't happen anymore. So one of the things that I have noticed a significant increase is texting among my colleagues, as opposed to sending a an email or something like that, because text people seem to be more responsive more rapidly to a text than to an email. So I like that, but I still think that the working remotely is not the villain here. It's how we handle it. And if we cannot keep everybody in the loop on a regular basis, it's a problem. But I think the problem can be solved by recognizing that there needs to be some informal conversations, whether they be, happy hour, and we all, sit there and imbibe on our own, preferred libation, or whether we're talking to individuals on a face-to-face basis via Zoom or coffee on a park bench or something like that. The recognition needs to be is that we're all different, and what works for one doesn't necessarily work for another. So as a manager, as a leader of a functionality, you have to continually take the temperature of the people that work for you, because you need to know what to do with them.
Absolutely. Very, very wise words. Over to you, Roshun. Top tips.
Yes, I think two things that I've kind of taken away. I think the first one for me is trying to maintain a work-life balance. I think it is very important. I think we alluded to, the fact that we are working from home. We could just go on forever. Certainly at the start of the crisis, we had so much work to do as a Treasury department. There was nowhere really to stop. So I think it's sometimes just reflecting, taking some time out, because I think having the refreshment in between will certainly help keep going, and finding times other extracurricular aspects, which again will aid learning. The amount of times I've heard people say, well, I've got nothing better to do, I might as well just work. I mean, there's got to be something else as well out there to kind of keep the mind, nourished and to keep going. So certainly that's one thing that I've learned to try and do, certainly towards the last few months. I think importantly is, again, staying connected. So the communication piece is vital. So again, I'm still trying to have these informal chats with my team, my colleagues, my peers within the company. I think staying connected, learning about what's happening in the new normal is vital. Again, to both learn and see future challenges that may come up, and also just to stay connected. I also have been leveraging on my treasury and banking network. So, talking to the banks, talking to, my peers in other companies to find out how they're tackling situations. It's all a great way of learning, and, picking up some really good ideas and having some positive benefits on the back of that.
Lots of good stuff there. I hope people can reflect on. And it is really, though, that difficulty of, as you put it, got nothing better to do, so shall I do some more work? And I know the feeling absolutely myself. So one of the things I've taken up doing is jigsaw puzzles, because I would normally be out active every evening and weekends doing various of my hobbies. Can't do those. But just taking your mind to somewhere else, or even that meditation where you stare at a leaf for 2 minutes, it refreshes you. It really does work, but it's just making yourself do it, I find, is the challenge. But we'll move over finally to Zonika, please. Your top tips.
My first tip is about finding the learning in every situation in the crisis. And I really suggest just making a few dot points about what are you learning at the moment, so that when things quieten down, you can go back to it and really reflect on that. Obviously, in the heat of the moment, there's just too much going on, but just do try write down 1 or 2 bullet points that just kind of sum up where you are, just remind you of it, so you can go back and learn from it. And my other tip is about using the informal learnings to learn about things other than work, right? Go learn about the solar system. Go learn about the universe. Go learn about something else. Just getting that mental break on a topic completely different to work can be very, very refreshing for your next cash forecasting meeting, or your next negotiation with the bank, or whatever it is, or that difficult conversation with an employee. Just having had your brain focus on something else definitely makes a big difference.
Absolutely does, and it really does. As we said earlier, it builds our resilience. But I love the thought of reflecting on what you've learned, and I'm certainly going to be spreading the word with as many people as possible about that, because I think that's a great point. So we've run out of time for this session. It's been absolutely fascinating getting all of your insights. Really appreciate you being here with us today and informing our audience of all your different experiences and giving your recommendations as we move through these uncertain times. So I just really want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart. Zonika, Roshun, Alan, it's been great to have you here today, and thank you once again.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you.
Thank you.